Free to turn on your mic in case you need to ask a question. I'm happy to answer any questions as we go. So the purpose of this is I'm talking about flipped classroom, but I'm also going to talk a lot about the concept of peer instruction, which is kind of what I did. I'm basically sharing what I did with, we have a class at Augusta Tech called SIST 1510, Web Development. Teaches students the beginning of web development, which is HTML and CSS. HTML is how you structure web pages. CSS is how you change the visuals of them. So it's a very kind of hands-on type class. And so I'm going to go share kind of what I did with you with the flipped classroom concept and peer instruction. And then I'll lead into talking later how you could apply peer instruction and the flipped classroom to even different types of classes in case your content's not exactly of the technical variety. So in this class, I had taught it face-to-face. It met 2 days a week. On the first day of the week, we'd do a lecture. On the second day of the week, we would do a lab where they could work on their lab stuff while I was there. And I transitioned this from a face-to-face class to a hybrid class. And what a lot of people might, the first instinct is to do, well, to change this to hybrid, well, on the day we're in class, I'll lecture. And the day they're supposed to work online, well, that'll be their lab, and I'll be available to help them and answer questions. But instead, I wanted to flip the classroom. And to flip the classroom means, like, I don't want the lecture to be the day I'm there, because I feel that's actually where I add less value to the student. They could actually watch a video or read a textbook and get the information that I needed to deliver. The information in the class is very technical, and it's a little bit dry. You need to learn a lot of syntax about these languages to kind of do that. The creativity and the fun kind of comes after you learn these building blocks, and now you start putting them together. Now you can enjoy some creativity. So the dry stuff, you know, it would just be a boring lecture. So I let them read the textbook or watch a video about it. And then when they came to class, this is where they actually did work. And I was on my feet the entire time in the class, just walking around and observing people. And it's a combination of things. I used a lot of what we call peer instruction technique, where it wasn't just like the student working in isolation on a lab exercise. I would put them into groups. And in these groups, I had a rule that only one person could be at the computer at one time. So if like somebody else knew something, they just couldn't like shove the person out of the way and just type it. They had to tell the person that was typing to type it. This is reminiscent, if you're familiar with computer or a little bit of programming, a concept called peer programming. Companies do it where you will have co-workers programmed together. And the reason they do this is knowledge sharing. You pick up some tips from your coworker that you didn't know. It's common also to try and set up maybe a younger programmer with an older programmer, a mentor, and you learn tips and tricks. It's a great way to do knowledge sharing. So I was trying to implement this in this class. And then, of course, the people at the keyboard during different class sessions, that would rotate out. And part of my observation, walking around as everybody, is I'm trying to note who's participating, who's not, who seems like they're not getting it, who does. And so I, in different of these class sessions, could change the groups around, mix and match the people, change the person on the keyboard to give them a variety. Because oftentimes the person on the keyboard, I might want to push the person that's less prepared, because then he has to listen to the more prepared people tell him how to type. And to tell you a little bit of the reasoning behind this is, let me kind of describe kind of what I went through in school. Like a standard computer science class I might have gone to is I go to a lecture, you listen to the instructor in front of the class, kind of tell you the concepts, tell you these building blocks, but they're just relaying the information to you. They're just presenting the information. And as a student, it's always easy to listen to a lecture. You kick back, there's nothing really to do except take some notes. But then when you go home, they give you the homework assignments. And in computer science, it could be pretty in-depth and take a long time. And that's when you wrestle with the content. You try and apply this content to a real setting. And this is where you get into sense making. So if we can think of learning as part of like if you're giving a lecture, you're just kind of trying to share the information with them. It's like an information sharing. But when the student has to wrestle with the content and try and build something with it or do something with it to apply it, that's sense making. This is where they're really starting to understand the material. Now they're knowing how to relate it to what they know, how to do things with it, a transfer of knowledge. And so one thing you can think about, well, what's harder? Is it the information sharing, just me presenting to them harder? Or is it harder for them when they're trying to wrestle with the material? And I mean, I can tell you from my past student experience, the time you're at home working on the homework project is the time you're pulling your hair out. You're running into compiler issues. You don't know what to do. I went to school before Google. I didn't have Google to help me. And sometimes you get stuck. And so what I'm doing is, like, let's say watch a video for the lecture, but now when you come to course, I'm going to make you do your homework right here, right in front of me. Pull your hair out right here. But at least you've got me now to be there. You've got your fellow students to help support you and kind of share knowledge. And I think this is just a much better use of my time to add value to the student, because presenting, I can outsource that. We have good textbooks. We have videos to watch. But the ability to actually wrestle with content while I'm there, right there in front of you, looking over your shoulder, one, it allowed me to answer questions that they didn't ask. Sometimes when you're a novice, they were doing things that, like, they didn't even know was wrong, or they didn't even know they should ask a question about it, but I could recognize it and kind of give them correction on that. The other thing, the observation, it required a little bit of facilitation, because some people don't want to participate, some people are shy, so you try and move them around a little bit. You try and ask some questions where you can to kind of pull people out to get them working. But I wanted to kind of be there when they were wrestling with the content. And often when they got stuck, one thing I did not want to be was the answer key. Like, I could easily say, like, well, that's wrong, do it like this, and now they can go forward in the assignment. But instead, better value is to tell them my thought process. Well, if I was stuck here, how would I attack this problem? How would I think about it? How would I troubleshoot it? Let's go to Google, and this is what I would search for. Now, in this class, I'm big on using Google. In the programming world, memorizing syntax is actually not that important. I don't remember the syntax for a lot of these languages I use. A day-to-day programmer is going to search Google 50 to 100 times a day. You just look up what you need to when you need to do it. But there's an art to knowing how to look for stuff. What do you need to look for? How do you assimilate the information and put it together? So I'm less worried about people cheating, and I'm more worried about how can you use the tools at your disposal. And today, the internet's at your disposal, so how do we use it to help you build things? So my course was Flip the Classroom. It's like, do the homework in front of me so I can help you. And of course, their homework projects, they couldn't do all of their homework in class. We didn't have that much time, but they did a good portion of that in class while I was there to help them with that. Now, peer instruction was kind of like, I liked the groups most of the time. Sometimes I would do individual lab exercises. And the individual lab exercises were really for me to get a good assessment of people, how they were working. And again, they would individually work at something at their desk. I would just walk around again, peer over shoulders, see how they were doing. And then that actually helped me analyze a little bit too, like maybe the student is not getting enough out of the group that he was in, or maybe they're not participating enough. So I use that as really kind of a formative assessment. So I kind of assess where the student's at and try and help them with the concepts or move the groups around to give them some exposure, to get them participating more. So that works. That's a flipped classroom concept where it's like homework, lecture got flipped around. And I used some portion of what we call peer instruction. But that's how you'd use it in anything. That class, you could almost say it's very psychomotor, because you're building stuff. We really want to get to the point like, hey, let's just build stuff. You build stuff, I help you build stuff, and that's how you apply the information in that class. But what happens if you're teaching a class that's conceptual, or you got some other things? And so that I'll talk about kind of peer instruction. A guy named Eric Mazur at Harvard, he's a physics professor at Harvard. back in the 90s, he came up with this thing called peer instruction. Nowadays, we kind of call it flipped classroom. It's kind of a combination of things there. But what he found was he would teach the students, he would give lectures, but then he stumbled on the fact that students didn't really have a good knowledge transfer. Like they'd learn recipes for like while he's in class, like this is how you do it, this is how you do it on the test. But then they couldn't take the same principles that he was teaching them and apply it to kind of a broader picture and more conceptual questions. So he kind of stumbled on the fact that, like, he talks about, he's got a great YouTube video I should share with people, but he talks about like he was a great presenter. He did like lots of scientific tricks in front of people with pendulums, swinging across the room, swinging back. And he called it like, it's my Hollywood show. I was like a great presenter. I gave a great lecture. And he said he got great reviews. Students loved him. But then he found they couldn't transfer this knowledge after class, after they were through with the subject. So instead, what he tried to do was pull in more student-to-student interchanges, where he started peer instruction. And so, and there's lots of research that's been done on this throughout the years, and it's, has fascinating things for learning. But I'll explain a little bit about like how it's done. Like say, give up on trying to present all of your content. You don't even think about presenting 100% of your content in class. You outsource that. Make them watch videos, make them read a textbook, make them do that before class. So when they come to class, you might give a little mini lecture at the beginning of class, but you're going to pick a choke point. You're going to pick something that the students kind of struggle with. Because if they're not struggling with it, they seem to easily get it from a video or the textbook. Well, you don't need to spend your time. You can add the value where they struggle. So maybe they would talk about this choke point that the students have, but then they would give like a very quick assessment. Like maybe they put a multiple choice question on the board, and they would want all the students to hold up. Maybe, today people use clickers in classes to do this, but they used to use index cards, and they would have a letter wrote, like you had to pick A, B, C, and D. All the students would pick their letter and just raise it up so the instructor could see which choice they had. Then the sweet spot for this method is between 30 and 70%. If students can kind of agree within 30 to 70%, then let the students try and discuss it amongst each other in groups to try and convince each other that their idea is right, that their answer to the question is right. And he found that the novices could explain it to novices sometimes better than he could explain it. Because as experts, we have expertise reversal effect, or some psychologists call it the curse of knowledge. After we've actually gained such expertise, we kind of forget what it was to be a novice, or like why you don't get that. It seems so simple to us. So it actually helped to have them into groups where they could discuss. Now here's the reason between the 30 to 70%. Like if less than 30% of your class kind of agrees on the right answer, maybe it might be best for you to kind of go back over the information. And if more than 70% like agree over it, maybe they wouldn't get as much value out of the student-to-student interaction, so you kind of go over it and you continue with your next concept. But if you're in the sweet spot, first, you don't put students into groups right away. You give them a couple minutes to think about their answer. And then you put them into groups so they can try and convince each other like why they're right. And hopefully they're going to come to the right answer. And after a certain amount of time, they answer the question again. And now you can actually look again to see like, okay, are more people getting the right answer? Or you could go back into a group session, or you could decide that's enough, and you go towards more of a kind of a debriefing. Okay, well, let's analyze it. And why did you think this, or why did you think this, and this is why it should have been this. And this is, in a fantastic way, it kind of relates to learning is a social experience. It turns the students from being passive people that are just going to listen to a lecture, sit there, take some notes, to active participation. They can't help but actively participate. This is something I noticed when I did my flipped classroom concept. And I will tell you, there are times at the beginning of class, especially at the beginning of the semester, you have some students that are a little bit disconcerted. They're not used to participating in a class like that actively. They're like, listen, I just wanted to come here. I wanted you to present. I just wanted a lecture, and I wanted to take some notes. Now you're making me work. But it's good for them. And eventually, I think they do start enjoying the student-to-student activity. Yeah, I even had some students, you get the students that are like, these people slow me down. It's like you could just tell me to do the work, I could do the work, and I'd be done much faster. And so sometimes we have talented students that think like that, but they think like that because in school we work on trivial projects. The kind of software development you do in school are trivial because we're trying to teach you teaching concepts. When you get in the real world, you're often working on projects that are so big, you have to have a team with you. You just can't do it by yourself. So it's like one of those unwritten learning objectives. You got to learn to work with a team now. You got to learn to work with people. And yes, some people slow you down, but you help that person because this is what you're going to do in the real world. All the programmers at one company have a wide variety of skill levels. You're going to help people. They're going to help you sometimes. Maybe you have different specialties. So it's also learning teamwork and helping them build from that. So, I mean, I highly recommend a combination of flipped classroom and peer instruction. And you can do peer instruction. I mean, some people think of it as a flipped classroom or a combination of both. If all I did was flip the classroom in my class, they could have come in and worked individually and I just helped them. So that's still technically a flipped classroom because they're doing the work in class. But I think the peer instruction is a great tool. I think that adds a great deal of value. But so now I've kind of explained how a flipped classroom works and how peer instruction works. So I want to open it up. If you guys have any questions, comments, if you tried it, want to try it, but I'm here to kind of discuss that with you.
Mark, I just want to make a comment there. I have used that concept before. System 1001 is one of those courses where it's a plethora of things, as you know already. But I think the unit for me where I had to really flip the classroom was with chapter 10 on the program development life cycle and the system development life cycle because they didn't have a concept of it. And that peer-to-peer learning really worked for me. I'm going to try something with small groups this time, though. You were saying something about using small groups. How many groups could we use for the flipped situation? Could it be 2 or 3, maybe?
In my situation, I thought ideally it would be 2 to 3.
Okay.
Because in my situation, like I wanted one at the keyboard, and after you get more than 3, it's hard to kind of see the person working on the computer.
Okay.
But
okay.
It might be different depending on the subject matter. I could see in certain subject matter like humanities, maybe there's a group of 4 or 5 students that are hashing out some idea. So it might depend on your subject matter, how you group them.
Okay. Because I used 2 to 3 this time. I just didn't know what you thought was best there. And it depends.
Well, I think you have to be flexible on that based on the subject matter.
Okay. All right, then. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, Cameron asked a question about like how do you make the students read or watch the material beforehand? Well, I definitely ran into this issue in my flipped classroom. And I gotta say, I sometimes made it a little awkward for students because when they were like supposed to do stuff, if they weren't prepared, it would kind of show to your peers that you didn't prepare. And then that's sometimes why I also did the individual lab assignments to observe them so I could know they're not getting prepared for class. And I think the peer pressure kind of helped a little bit. I think people started preparing a lot more than they would because I was always putting them on the spot every single course. Every day you got to come in and work. So I think after that they started kind of prepping beforehand.
Yeah.
I will say there's a website called perusal.com. I've never used it. But Eric Cruz, the same guy that developed Flip Learning, or the peer instruction, it's a course that actually makes reading your material more interactive. It makes it more of a social experience for students, and it actually has a lot of analytics, so you can actually see that your students are working through the reading that you've assigned.
Give me that
Also with
website.
things like
Give me that website again.
perusall.com, Perusall.
USALL perusal.com.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
All right. So I'll see. So Ashley had a comment. Yeah, using quizzes to make sure. Putting them in groups based on their Hogwarts houses. Yeah, I mean, I actually like anything that makes it more fun for students. Sometimes let them pick their own names. I would try and encourage camaraderie, a little bit of competition, things like that. So anything to do to make it more fun. And Brian asked us, do we find the more creative ideas enable students to overcome their reticence about participating in class? So I don't know how to define like this as creative, but I would say I've had experiences in class where I do give them the chance to express themselves, especially in discussions where not this class, but when I taught like SIS 1001, we had some discussions that were very conceptual, very kind of like, let's discuss some societal ethics impacts of something. And then you put them in groups, and they get to express themselves. And I do see that increases them participating in class because they get used to talking more and sharing more. The funny thing you always notice is, like when you're given a lecture, you know, we think that we're there to answer their questions, but the truth is these students don't answer questions. It's the rare student that asks questions. If we could read their minds, you would see one student shy, the other student saying, I don't want to bother the professor with this. I'll like talk to him after class, but then they never do. One student's like, oh, I didn't prep for class, so I shouldn't ask a question or he'll know. There's so much mental speak, I think, going on in their heads that nobody's asking questions that they really need to be asked. But when you put them into these groups, I think there's more of a free flow. They feel like they can ask their peers questions when they don't ask their instructors. I attended an educational webinar one time that they said something about Generation Z students. When a Generation Z student is sitting in the classroom and curiosity about something the instructor said comes in their mind, their first instinct is to pull out their phone and Google more about it.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of asking the expert that's in front of the class that could probably elaborate on that factor, their first instinct, let me Google it.
The Generation Z, that's right.
So, yeah, so the group does kind of help pull people out and get them talking more. Ryan in the chat, how does this method work, or does it in a COVID sensitive context? Well, that's interesting, Ryan, because I did all this pre-COVID. But in a COVID situation, we got to think about how do we do things virtually. So one thing we're already doing virtually is we're outsourcing a lot of our lectures. We're telling them to read the assignment. We're trying to give them video material to learn. So now when you do have a session, especially like maybe an optional virtual session to collaborate and they come in, it doesn't have to be about presenting new content, especially if we have to make it optional. We don't want to present new content, but what we can do is wrestle with the content we've already taught them. And we do it in a similar way. You'll give a mini, maybe lecture about a concept they've already gone over on the video, but then you kind of use a polling question or one of those multiple choice questions to get some feedback from the student in the collaborate session. And again, if you hit that sweet spot, 30–70%, put everybody into breakout groups. Into 3 or 4 people breakout groups, let them discuss it with themselves. And then when they come back, you ask the question again to see if the answers fluctuated, if more people are drifting towards the right question. And then maybe after 1 or 2 segments of that, you kind of go back in a debrief and you kind of explain your thought process on it.
Another thing, Mark, if I might add, I really saw this with a project that I did. It was called Joe Lone Shark, and they were catching a cyber criminal throughout the term. And upon us catching this cyber criminal, they had to go look at laws for different states for cyber. They had to go and take a look at just different things that would catch a cyber criminal in a certain
Right.
state. And what was interesting about that project was that students that would never have said anything took time with the group to give input. And I didn't say a whole lot. I kind of let them have their way with it, and it just came out. So you're so right about just letting them take charge of their learning in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. I just got to find a new way to help them with the breakout groups and things. We've used groups, but I'd like to try to break those groups smaller and see what I can do. But
One thing how I recognize if I have a good discussion board prompt is my students will actually go beyond my, I require like 2 responses. When they blow past that because they're more interested in talking, then it's like less about satisfying my requirement. I know that's the good discussion prompt. Let me keep that one in the class. And let me replace the ones that, are just getting the bare minimum of responses. So Miriam talks about gamification. Gamification's great. If anywhere you can figure out how to gamify the class, give them little dopamine hits. I use the Gamigaji scoreboard in Blackboard. You can load that in. And what that does is that creates a scoreboard in the class so students can see where they rank, whether they're the 5th student or they're the 19th student. Now, the way this works for FERPA is you can't share grades of everybody else. They just know their ranking, and then there's like a fake name for everybody else. So you don't know where anybody else falls. You just know where you fall. So that was a good leaderboard to use. The Gamigaji leaderboard, we can add it into your Blackboard course. It shows up on the dashboard.
what's it called again, Mark?
Gamigaji leaderboard. I'd have to look up the spelling of Gamigaji again.
Yeah, you just go to your dashboard and click on add a module, and you have the list of all the different tools you can add to the dashboard, and that's one of those.
Okay, add a module.
But
Okay.
students thought that was fun, and usually the students that thought it were the most fun were the top 5. Top 5 students would end up finding out who each other were and trying to compete with each other to displace them. So it was kind of fun for the students. But it's also useful sometimes for that student to realize, like, oh, I'm slacking. I'm like in the far behind in the class. Let me go ahead and catch up. And Ron is asking how it can work with a discussion board. So like when we talked about how you could do it in a virtual session that's synchronous, like when you're at the same time. You could use it. Discussion boards have their value, but again, that's also like kind of like doing the homework. It's like you're doing that on your own. You're doing that analysis on your own, but it's kind of a mix in between. But because you also are interacting with students, so you do get that peer interaction and peer instruction going on in there.
Yeah, this is Ron. Moving to an online concept. Moving to pure online. And trying to do some of these concepts you're talking about here sounds quite difficult because everyone basically is kind of working on their own to do things, and you try to provide as much of tools and things to help them with the chapter material and so forth. And that's kind of where I'm working through discussion board to try to open things up, I guess, and ask pose questions to the students about the material and so forth, and then observe their feedbacks using the discussion boards for each chapter that I have.
Yeah. Well, I could say like one thing you said about it kind of being harder. I think the difference between a face-to-face when I did the lecture class versus the flipped classroom hybrid, I don't think it was harder, but I do think it was different. It was different because I had to focus my energies in different places. So instead of prepping for the lecture, instead I had to do just a bit more planning and what we're going to do in the lab that day. So it was a little bit of design of what we're doing in the lab, what we're going to work on, how I'm going to assess them. And it was just but instead of prepping for a lecture, I was just there and I was very attentive to what was going on. So it saves some time elsewhere, cost some time. So I don't think one was more difficult than the other. I think it was just a different focus and attention.
Okay. Yeah, I'm still trying to work through this, especially my one class, which is systems analysis and design. There's a lot of it's a lot more, topic driven, learning
Yeah.
the concepts and the methodologies and all that to work from point A and to get down to point C when you're developed the system. It's all those little
Right.
steps in between that that the students need to understand that concept, I guess. But I agree with you. In the real world, they're going to work in teams. They're not going to work necessarily individually. They're going to work in groups, and they'll be assigned specific items and tasks to complete. Because they'll be working on a project team, so they need to learn how to work in groups and be a social animal, I guess, to some extent. This whole thing with COVID-19 now is brought a lot of opened up a lot of eyes with regards to especially working online environment, doing more of that than working in an office structure. So
Yeah.
that's going to get more emphasis, I think, as industry goes forward, maybe more so than they have been.
Yeah, I definitely agree, especially, I think, in every sector, but especially in the technology sector.
Yes, absolutely. You've got the technology there. All you have to do is ensure that your resources have the availability and access to all that technology to make them productive.
Yeah.
And just like this, even working in a team, they can collaborate or Zoom or what have you, and have team meetings and do all that other stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, if I could, that was one of the things for accounting. It's kind of the same thing where it's a lot of conceptual. There is hands-on, but it's a lot of conceptual stuff. I had thought about trying this semester is breaking them up into groups or teams, and then meeting with the teams individually, like doing a collaborate session with just those teams, and then letting them have a session where basically I'm creating the environment for them to talk, so I'm not waiting on them to try and figure out if they're so that they do, and then I'm there to answer questions if they need.
I like that, Mark. She said create the concept and then let them break out into groups, or do that again for me so I can make notes. I like that.
I will say one thing I would bring up, that it is useful sometimes to give them time without you. Sometimes that they can discuss things without you present. Because I would often, as part of my walking around the room, sometimes I would sit with a group during discussions, but sometimes that shuts down the discussion a little bit because then they want to interact with you more than they do their fellow students. So it's kind of a balance you strike between that.
But my thought with that is I definitely want them to meet without me, but if I can get the group, basically do just one introductory so that establish that first connection with the group,
right,
and then give them their space so that I know they've at least
good.
met one time.
Right, right. I like that.
Can we create, I'm thinking there's a way to do this, but I don't remember, where we give the students just a room created for them, or is that something Zoom or something else would need to be done?
Yeah, you could do that and collaborate. You could just create different group sessions, and you could leave them open all semester and just let the students communicate amongst each other when they want to meet.
That's what I was thinking, but I couldn't remember exactly.
All right, so what you're saying is in the collaborate, what you would do is just keep it open all term and then do that again.
Correct. So let's say you had a team A, team B, team C. You could go into collaborate and create a collaborate session called team A, another one called team B, and just tell them, hey, this session's open all semester. It's up to you guys when you want to log in. So they could log in at any time. but I guess they would email each other and like, hey, let's agree on Monday at 5 p.m. We'll all get in there, and then they do. And you don't even have to be present. It's just going to be there all semester for them.
I have in the past, when working on group projects, had just a little piece of the grade kind of ensure that everybody's doing it, but to submit to the instructor basically either an email or a paper saying that this was the time they agreed to meet this week, and here's who all was present at that meeting, kind of as just an accountability thing.
Okay, that's wonderful.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, they could record the session too. I like the idea of the accountability paperwork. Sometimes I would have some of these groups that were working together in my class, I would make somebody the team lead, and they'd be responsible for the paperwork for the team or coordinating something with the team. And then I would like rotate that around so different people got experience being their team lead and having a little bit of responsibility.
I'm not sure if you've ever worked much with it, but Forms in Outlook 365, the program Forms is a great place that you can create like a little quiz, and it's really accessible for mobile, but you can create like a little form where they go in and fill it out and submit it, and then you can actually print out an entire Excel spreadsheet of all that they've submitted during the form per group, so that every time the team submit something, you can then at the end of the semester print out all the submissions by that one team.
I've actually done something very similar to that using Google Forms, but I like the idea of doing it in Microsoft Forms to allow them to peer evaluate each other once they finished working on a group project. So they all get to go in and evaluate each member of their team on a scale of 1 to 5, say what that person did well or where they think that person has the opportunity to grow in a group environment. And I send the anonymous feedback to each individual student, but the 1 to 5 scale goes on an Excel spreadsheet, and it becomes part of their average on the assignment.
That's awesome.
Real quick, everyone, we're talking about these group scenarios. Prescott Lurch teaches a course called Advanced. I can't think of the name of it right now. But if you want to contact him, he is giving his group the summer session. What is involved is he takes individuals, he has students, and he forms them into 2 teams. I think there's 2 teams this year, and they actually go out in the workplace and find businesses that have projects that need to be done. And he then takes those and then turns those over to the students. And the students then, they have their team form, they have a team leader, and they go through this concept of using agile concepts and develop and actually create a working system based on what the business need is. And students are given a presentation on that, I believe, tomorrow. And if you contact him, he can give you a link, Collaborate, I believe, link that you could sit in and actually watch the students give their presentations, talk about the whole process, and actually have a working system that they will present. So Mr. Lurch will, he can send you an email and give you the information on that if you care to just sit in and see how this works in a group concept. So it's of course it's technical, it's programming, and they develop a system from scratch and actually create a working system. So it's really interesting. The students really do a fantastic job. He's been doing this now for several years.
Yeah, Cameron posted in the chat the link if anybody wants it to see those presentations for Prescott Lurch.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's from 3 to 4 tomorrow. Yeah. So it is interesting if you really want to see how it works.
Anybody else got any questions?
Yeah, we've reached the open Q&A portion of this, and so questions can be about anything distance ed or Blackboard related at this point.
I guess this flip concept. This is going to be my first semester full semester teaching online. So the one class is going to be more of a challenge, I guess, because it covers more, like I said, the systems analysis and design. So it is a lot of concepts. So working in discussion boards, and then of course having project assignments. It's kind of difficult. I've tried to do form groups when I was teaching in class, and it worked some, but in the overall, I didn't have much success at it. So,
Well, I would think that a case study approach might be good for that. Case studies usually they have to deal with the concepts, but there's also some wiggle room about how it's best applied, and there's a lot of discussion that leads from that.
Yeah, that's what I do. We have a case study. The textbook I use has 3 or 4 different mock companies, and they pick it up early on, and you use that case study and work it through each chapter, and at the end, then you kind of follow through with that this mock company, and you start out with a request that the company wants to do this or they want to do that, and then you work from there. So and so you really get it's good for that part of it, and that's my intent is to I've done that when I was teaching it in class, so it'll work good for online as well, just setting these up and then incorporating the discussion boards in with the chapter work to discuss the material that the chapter covers. The material also provides videos that you were talking about, so videos will be a big help too for the students. But again, getting them to use the videos, I guess, or watch the videos, it might be a more challenging part of that.
Mark, let me ask a question too while we're at it. I was looking for some virtual field trips this term online. Anybody got any good ideas for that? Just for the concepts taught in 1001?
No, I haven't looked into many of those. So.
Okay. Okay.
I'm not sure what the specific concepts are in that class. What did you say the course name was, James?
It's SYST 1001. It's the computer concepts course, and it's a conceptual course. So I teach them 2 or 3 skills a week on different concepts in computers. But I was just looking for some virtual field trips for them, and some ideas. I just was looking at a couple of websites, but I was wondering what you guys thought about that.
If you had chosen something related to humanities, I could help you, but you're on your own for that one.
Okay. All right.
I think that we lost Mark maybe, but we are out of time anyway. Does anybody have one last question they want to get in, or?
Well, here's a question. When are the self-reviews due for this term?
The 21st, August 21st.
August 21st? Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for the heads up on that. I almost forgot about those. I'm still working on course stuff.
Me too.
Courses, they kind of switch things, and I'm trying to rework some stuff because one of my publishers have kind of changed some things around. So
I know. I had to think. I'm like, oh my God, the term is getting ready to start. When are those due? Okay. All right then.
Everybody have a great rest of the week.
Yeah, thanks for the good info. Thanks, Mark. There was some good stuff in there. Just
Thank you, Mark. We
trying
appreciate it.
yeah,
Appreciate
go back
Mark.
and re-review this again and see how I can use some of this good information. So